One of the dismal realities of the agricultural sector in independent India has been that it never experienced a high growth phase. Agricultural sector never experienced a high growth phase in India, in independent India, unlike the non-agricultural economy. The highest decadal growth, compound annual growth rate or CAGR, for agriculture has been just 3.5 in the 1980s. So 1980s was Green Revolution. Despite Green Revolution, it was just 3.5% in India, the agricultural growth in the whole decade. Also after, actually 1970s, late 60s and 70s was the beginning of Green Revolution, but it continued till 1980s. Also, after experiencing a spurt in decadal growth during the 1980s, agricultural growth suffered relative stagnation thereafter. This is in sharp contrast to the non-agricultural growth, which consistently increased from 1980s to 2000. So it's simple, very simple passage. It says agriculture sector, it never saw a constant growth, a very high growth. Why? That has not been mentioned. Why? But it says the highest growth that it saw was 3.5% in 80s. Okay, 3.5% of growth, and even after 3.5% of growth in 80s, in 1980s, there was a sharp decline after that. So despite achieving a 3.5, which is actually the all-time highest growth rate for agricultural sector in India, independent India, despite that it was not able to build upon it and eventually declined sharply. On the other hand, non-agricultural sector grew from 1980s, let me write down 80s, till 2000s. Non-agricultural sector kept on growing, but agricultural sector never had that long duration of growth, a continuous growth, high growth. Very straightforward passage, paragraph. Let's have a look at the answers now. Not answers, the question. Let's have a look at the question now. Which one of the following statement best reflects the corollary to the above passage? Corollary, basically, which one of the following statement can be seen as the conclusion to the passage, right? The passage that we have discussed. Now, benefit of economic reforms percolates down more slowly to the agriculture sector than in other sector of the economy. Now, if you pay attention to the paragraph, it clearly shows a contrast between non-agricultural sector versus agricultural sector and says that agricultural sector has not ever seen a high growth phase in independent India. On the other hand, non-agricultural sector continued to grow from 80s to 2000s. So what does that refer to? That might mean that the benefit of economic reforms, the economic reforms that we had, percolated down more slowly to the agriculture sector. This is one of the conclusion that we can draw. Absolutely, we can draw this conclusion because one sector, despite the same things, the same economic reforms which are applicable to all the sectors, agricultural sector was not able to grow properly. On the other hand, non-economic sector, non-agricultural sector were able to grow. They were able to sustain higher growth, while the highest that agricultural growth was 3.5%. So this could be one of the conclusion, this could be one of the corollary. So let's park it. B, for India, the Green Revolution was not as useful as it was expected to be. Now, just because 80s is mentioned, we cannot really comment upon the Green Revolution. Okay, this puts you in sort of a grayish area where this might look right, could be wrong as well, but there are more chances of this being wrong. The reason why this option in my opinion is wrong is, this says Green Revolution was not as useful as it was expected to be. We cannot really comment upon Green Revolution. Yes, Green Revolution was there in late 60s and continued till 80s, and therefore in 80s India had the highest growth rate in agriculture, but still, was it useful or not? We cannot comment upon that. So, therefore, I am eliminating option B. India lagged behind other countries in adapting mechanized and modern farming. How could that be the conclusion? No, because in this passage, we are comparing Indian sectors, that agriculture sector was not able to grow while other sectors were able to grow. This comparison with other countries is not in the scope of the passage, and that's why we cannot draw this conclusion. other countries were able to do it. There can be any reason, there can be multiple reasons for that. So C can be eliminated. D, rural to urban migration resulted in the stagnant agricultural sector. We cannot comment upon that. Again, this is absolutely a new term introduced, nor does the passage, neither does the passage imply towards it, nor does it is explicitly mentioned, or nor does any information, additional information has been provided to draw to this conclusion. That's why D can also be eliminated. We are left with A. A is your right answer. With reference to the passage, the following assumptions have been made. Growing divergence between the fortunes of the agriculture and non-agriculture economy in India could have been reduced, contained by. So, divergence means basically this. Both are moving away from each other. So, there is a decline here, there is a rise here. Rise in the non-agricultural sector while decline in the agricultural sector. So, this is saying growing divergence between the fortunes of the agriculture and non-agricultural economy in India could have been reduced, contained by. There are certain assumptions made for this. We have to identify which of those is or are valid. So, the first one, growing divergence. Yeah, the first one, adapting large scale cultivation of commercial crops and viable corporate farming. Large scale cultivation of commercial crops and viable commercial farming, that clearly means basically, would this lead to decrease in the gap between the agricultural and your non-agriculture economy? Yes, in my opinion. Why? Because if you are moving towards commercial crops, you are moving away from subsistence farming, and when you are moving away from subsistence farming, that clearly means that the income generated from agriculture is going to be more, because now you are treating agriculture as a business opportunity, or agriculture as something which brings revenue instead of relying it just on subsistence. So, if we adapt large scale cultivation of commercial crops and we viable, again not just corporate farming, viable corporate farming, this will lead to generating more income in agriculture sector, which might help to bridge the gap between the agricultural and non-agricultural sector. So, one can be assumption that is technically right. The second one, providing free insurance for all crops and heavily subsidizing seeds, fertilizers, electricity and farm machinery at par with developed countries. Now, this looks like a good idea, but if you're till here it would have been right, but now if you're doing at par with developed countries, we don't have that many resources. If you're trying to compete with developed countries, you need to come up with innovative solution instead of giving away the freebies and giving away the subsidies, which is not really a long-term healthy solution. So, 2 can be eliminated. So, which one of the following assumptions are valid? Only one. So, option A is the right answer to this question. It is hard to predict how changes in the climate and atmosphere's chemistry will affect the prevalence of and virulence of agricultural disease. Now, it's hard to predict the climate change and the atmospheric chemistry. If there is change in climate and change in atmosphere's chemistry, for example, change in the composition of atmosphere, if CO2 is increasing, other gases or other greenhouse gases are increasing, nitrogen and oxygen are going down, in that case, how that will affect the prevalence and virulence, that is the growth and of agricultural disease. So, how will these things, the climate change and change in the atmospheric composition chemistry, will lead to agricultural disease, lead to more and more? We have no idea. We don't, it is very hard to predict that. But there is a risk that such changes will make some plant infection more common in all climatic zones, perhaps catastrophically so. But there is a risk. It's very hard to predict, but there is one certain risk that certain infections will become more common, and especially in all climatic zones, not just limited to one climatic zone, and perhaps catastrophically so. Might even be a catastrophe. So, part of the problem is that centuries of selective breeding have refined the genomes of most high value crops. They are spectacular at growing in today's conditions, but genetic variations that are not immediately useful to them have been bred out. And this is good for yields immediately, but bad for coping with changes. A minor disease or even an unknown one could suddenly rampage through a genetically honed crop. So, what is it saying? This is saying that this is an issue. Why? part of the problem why these certain diseases, certain infections in plants can be catastrophic, because the plants have been bred in such a way, they have been refined genetically in such a way that they are spectacular, they are perfect, they are brilliant at producing outcomes or growing today's condition, but anything that differs from today's condition might lead to a catastrophe. So they are used to today's condition. If there is even any slight change in that, it could lead to failure of crops and similar stuff. And that is why certain infections are going to be more common. Okay. Okay. Which one of the following statement best reflects the central idea conveyed by the passage? Again, the main idea question. Global climate change adversely affects the productivity of crops. Does it? It's hard to predict. The passage itself says it's hard to predict. How is it going to affect the productivity of crops? So A can be eliminated. B, our total dependence on genetically honed crops entail possible food insecurity. Yes, because genetical crops are more prone to climate change and more prone to plant infections caused due to climate and atmospheric change. And that is why B can be parked. Looks like a right answer. Our food security should not depend on agricultural productivity alone. Uh, Nowhere does the passage compares or relates food security with agricultural productivity. It particularly talks about genetically modified crops, but not food security and relating it to productivity. So C can be eliminated. D, genetically honed crops should be replaced with their wild varieties in our present cultivation practices. This is not what the passage said. They are at more risk. Where is that? Yes, they are at more risk. One could suddenly rampage through a genetically honed crops. They are at more risk, but that doesn't mean that they should be replaced with wild varieties. We have developed genetically modified crops because they are perfect in present scenario. So no, we are not asking to replace them with wild varieties. That is absolutely wrong. So we are left with what? B. B is your right answer. With reference to the passage, the following assumptions have been made. Global climate change can result in the migration of several plant diseases to new areas. Yes, it can. If you look at it, more common. There is a risk that such changes will make some plant infection more common in all climatic zone. That means certain plant infections are limited to particular region, but they might migrate to other areas as well, and they might become more common across all climatic zone. Even in tundra or even in your subtropical, temperate region, everywhere those problems might, those same plant infections might arise. So yes, this option is this assumption is right. 2. Scientific understanding of the wild relatives of our present crop would enable us to strengthen food security. Yes. Yes, scientific understanding of the wild relatives of our present crop. Yes. If we are able to see wild relatives of present crops were able to survive at different temperature. This is very evident from the passage. Genetically modified crops that we have are suitable for the present climate scenario, but they are not very good at surviving at extremities. Any change, any slight change might lead to crop failure. So, if we understand the wild relatives of our present crop, we can strengthen food security. Absolutely, yes. So, which of the following assumptions are valid? Both 1 and 2. Both 1 and 2. So, C is the right answer. Now, the next passage. There has been no democracy that has grown economically without corporate capitalism. No democracy has grown without corporate capitalism. It helps in modernizing. What does corporate capitalism do? It helps in modernizing the economy, enabling the transition from rural to urban, agriculture to industry and services, which are inevitably with growth. So, no economy has developed without transitioning from, without corporate capitalism. Why? Because corporate capitalism helps it to grow from rural to urban, from transitioning from agriculture to industries and services. So, these things bring growth. So, it generates jobs, and there is no other way to fix a country's unemployment challenge without a further impetus to private business. Big companies can operate on a large scale and become competitive both domestically and externally. So, what it does, it generates jobs, And there is no other way to fix a country's unemployment without further impetus to private business. So big companies can operate on large scale and become competitive both domestically and externally. Unemployment problem can be solved using corporate capitalism. They generate job, they employ a lot of people, and this way the big companies can grow at large scale both domestically as well as internationally, externally. Examples are Tata, right? The most prominent example, or Airtel, Aditya Birla Group, right? A vibrant corporate, not Aditya Birla Group is not Airtel, it's Bharti Mittal, the Mittal Group, but yeah. A vibrant corporate capitalist base also leads to additional revenues for the state, which in turn can be used for greater welfare for the marginalized and creating a more level playing field in terms of opportunities. So what is happening? A vibrant corporate capitalist base leads to additional revenue for the state. From this, apart from generating employment and apart from growing internationally and domestically, they also provide sources, resources or additional revenues to the state, which in turn can be used. This, for example, the corporate tax that the state takes, this can be used for the benefit of the greater good or the benefit of the society, a greater welfare for the marginalized and creating a more level playing field in terms of opportunities. As simple as that. Moving ahead, question. Which one of the following best reflects the critical message conveyed? Critical message, basically your main idea question. Corporate capitalism is important for economic growth of a state and also for democracy. Absolutely right. They are important for economic growth of a state, yes, by providing jobs and by providing additional revenues to the government, and also for democracy because these additional revenues can be used for the betterment of marginalized group and providing them more opportunities and basically a equity in the growth, right? So this can be parked, this can be parked. Option B, corporate capitalism is imperative for a modern state to achieve its political objective. Imperative means opposing. Absolutely wrong. We can eliminate option D. We need corporate capitalism. We don't think that corporate capitalism is imperative. It's going to impede a state from achieving its goal. So absolutely wrong. No state can ensure its economic survival for long without the role of corporate capitalism. No, it does not say that it is important for economical survival. It doesn't say that. Example is North Korea. North Korea has survived for long, right? Enough. But they don't have corporate capitalism. So the option, and also if we remove this external knowledge as well, its passage does not say that it needs corporate capitalism for survival. It says corporate capitalism is important for growth. So if you want to grow, you need corporate capitalism, not just to survive, right? That is why C can be eliminated. D, corporate capitalism and democracy have mutual dependence for their continued existence. Do they have mutual dependence? Not at all. The passage never goes into the territory of mutual dependence. So B, C, D eliminated. A has been parked. A is the right answer to the question. With reference to the passage, the following assumptions have been made. Corporate assumptions have been made. We have to identify which of them are valid. Corporate capitalism promotes the growth of labor force and provides more employment opportunities. Absolutely right. Absolutely right with the passage. Provides more job, and that is why more employment opportunities and growth of labor force. Absolutely right. Poor and marginalized section of population are benefited by corporate capitalism due to trickle down effect. Yes, the additional revenue that the government gets is invested on the marginalized group of society. So yes, this is also right. So which of the following assumption are valid? Both 1 and 2. Maintaining an ecosystem just to conserve biodiversity will affect its commercial potential as well as the livelihood dependent on the ecosystem. There is also conflict between using an ecosystem only for livelihoods, for commercial exploitation, or strictly for conservation. Deforestation caused due to commercial exploitation will lead to direct harm like floods, situation problems, and microclimatic instability. Microclimatic instability. Apart from adversely affecting livelihoods dependent on forest. These conflicts are particularly accurate in developing countries where the dependence of people on the ecosystem is significant and commercial exploitation has the potential to boost national income. So, let's try to understand what the paragraph is saying. It's saying that if you want to maintain ecosystem and your goal is just to conserve biodiversity, it will affect the commercial potential as well as livelihood dependent on the ecosystem. So commercial potential, if you want to convert it into a national park, or if you want to convert it into a jungle safari, or livelihood dependents, the people who live closer to these ecosystems, such as people who are tribal people who are living in the forest, or people who live in the vicinity of the forest, such people, it is going to affect them. There is also a conflict between using an ecosystem only for livelihoods, for commercial exploitation, or strictly for conservation. Also, conflict between, if you use ecosystem for each of these things, only each of these things, then also there is going to be a conflict. How exactly? Ecosystem only for livelihoods, that the ecosystem only for livelihood, only tribal people can live in it. There is nothing else apart from that. We are not going to do anything else apart from that. Or for commercial exploitation, if you want to exploit it for the firewood, or if you want to exploit it for the resources you get from it, or strictly for conservation, if you just want to protect it. Either one of these things, if you are doing independently, they are also going to cause a conflict. Deforestation caused due to commercial exploitation will lead to indirect harm like floods, siltation problems, and microclimatic instability, apart from adversely affecting livelihoods dependent on the forest. If you use it only for commercial exploitation, that will lead to these issues. These conflicts are particularly acute in developing countries where dependence of people on the ecosystem is significant and commercial exploitation has the potential to boost national income. Now, there is this dilemma. What is the dilemma? That you can exploit these forests or these ecosystem to improve or boost your national income, increase the GDP and stuff. At the same time, what is going to do? This is acute in developing countries because they want to exploit as many resources as possible to grow. But on the same time, this is where there is dependence of people on the on the ecosystem. So there are a lot of people who are actually dependent on this ecosystem. So if you exploit it, you are leaving these people at the mercy of nature. Okay. So this is what the paragraph is saying. It's quite clear, I guess. Now moving ahead, let's have a look at the question. Question number 1. Which one of the following statement best reflects the critical message conveyed by the author of the passage? Now, critical message conveyed by the author of the passage. That means this is a main idea question. What is the main idea of this passage? Okay. Now, drill is simple. We'll go through each of the options. We'll break them down into smaller chunks and check for their consistency, as well as we have to check which one aligns with the passage the best. The thing about the critical message, main idea, purpose of the author, these kind of questions is there could be multiple right answer, right? But our job is to identify the one which is the best out of the rest. You have 4 options given, 2 could be right according to the passage, but one which covers the best most number of points and which covers the paragraph in a succinct way is going to be your answer. So moving ahead, option 1. Conservation of biodiversity is not an issue to be worried about when some people depend on ecosystem for their livelihoods. Now, if you compare it with the paragraph, this says this is not an issue to be worried about. Is it right according to the passage? Absolutely not. Because if you go back to the paragraph says there, where is that? Commercial exploitation leads to indirect harm and adversely affect livelihood dependent on forest. So this option 1 completely goes against the paragraph. This is in contrast. This is in contrast with what the passage says. And that is why option 1 can be eliminated. Moving ahead, commercial exploitation of forest goes against the fundamental rights of the people dependent on forest for food and shelter. Now, this looks like the right answer, right? But does the question talk about the fundamental rights? If you go back to the paragraph, this says it adversely affects livelihood dependent on people. There are people who are dependent on the forest, but never does it say that this is their fundamental right. Commercial exploitation of forest should not be there at all. It says when you commercially exploit a forest, there is going to be a conflict. Conflict because it can cause indirect harms like flood, siltation problem and microclimatic instability, as well as it puts you against the people who are dependent upon it for livelihood. But does the paragraph actually talk about fundamental rights? It never talks about that. And that is why you can eliminate option 2 as well. Option 2 can be eliminated because we don't have sufficient information regarding the fundamental rights. The passage never says that it is their fundamental rights and therefore commercial exploitation wouldn't be there. It says that there is going to be a conflict. And that is why the focus was never on the fundamental rights, right? Moving ahead, 3. Sustenance of livelihood and degradation of ecosystem while being together exacerbate one another, leading to conflicts and imbalance. Now you have to understand what exacerbate means. Exacerbate, this means, exacerbate means to worsen. Something is already bad and you're making it worse. That is exacerbation, right? So, sustenance of livelihood. That is, there are a group of people who are dependent upon the forest or the ecosystem for livelihood, and degradation of ecosystem, right? There are two things. While being together, exacerbate one another. So, if you're dependent on sustenance of your livelihood on the forest, then you cannot degrade ecosystem. At the same time, if you degrade the ecosystem, you affect the sustenance of livelihood. So one problem leads to another, another leads to this one. So they both are worsening each other, which is right according to the passage, leading to conflict and imbalance. Is there a conflict? Yes, it leads to conflict. Conflicts are particularly acute in developing countries. These conflict, which kind of conflict? That when you go for commercial exploitation, that form adversely affects the livelihood of people dependent on forests. So there is a conflict. And does it lead to conflict? Absolutely yes. And that is why we can park option C. Parking means basically I'm not selecting it as the right answer, but this looks like the right answer. So once I have gone through all the options that look right, they are factually correct according to the paragraph, I'm going to park them and then I'll choose the best out of them. Okay. Now option D. Commercial exploitation of ecosystem should be completely stopped. It's a very extremist statement. It should be completely stopped. Does the say that? If you go back to the paragraph, does the paragraph say that it should be completely stopped? It provides you information. There is conflict. One thing leads to another. Another thing leads to some other thing as well, right? So there is a direct conflict between commercial exploitation with the people dependent on the ecosystem. But does it say, and this issue, this conflict is worse in the developing countries, but does it say that one thing should be stopped completely? Never says that. Does it say that? Why? Because their commercial exploitation has the potential to boost national income. There is some positive aspect of commercial exploitation as well. So the author never goes into the territory of saying that you need to completely stop doing it. And that is why option D can also be eliminated. So we eliminate option D, we eliminate option A, B, we are left with C. Option C is the right answer. Which of the, with reference to the following passage, to the above passage, following assumptions have been made. Certain assumptions have been made. Assumptions are your unset premise. Now what exactly? So unset premise are the points that the author is driving towards. So the point that the author has mentioned, but unset premise means author has not really written it. Author assumes that you will already know this thing, right? Have been made. Now, what all assumptions have been made here? Now, it is a critical reasoning question, quite simple, quite straightforward, based on the same paragraph. Let's have a look at it. No country needs to depend on ecosystem to boost national income. Did the author say that? No, because it completely goes against the last line of the paragraph. If we go back to the last line, commercial exploitation has the potential to boost national income. So it has the potential, but does the author say that no country needs to be dependent upon it? Never says that. And that is why This one can be eliminated. 2. Resources, because this assumption has not been made, that's why I have eliminated option 1. 2. Resource rich countries need to share their resources with those of scant resources so as to prevent the degradation of ecosystem. Degradation. Now, does the author talk about difference between countries having more resources, countries not having resources and then sharing it? No. Author provides you with a picture that there are ecosystem and there is a conflict. If you exploit the ecosystem, people are dependent on it, their livelihood will be affected. If you don't exploit it, you won't be able to grow. So, commercial exploitation provides you an opportunity to grow. At the same time, it affects the people dependent upon it. So, there needs to be a fine balance for that, right? But does the author goes on to talk about resource rich countries needing to share their resources with XYZ, like there are different kind of countries, this must be done, those countries must do this and the other countries must do that, right? Never goes into that territory. The passage, its scope is very limited. These points were never raised in the paragraph altogether. So this assumption has also not been made here. Which of the following assumptions are valid? Both have not been made with respect to the passage, and that's why option D, neither 1 nor 2 are the right answer, is the right answer. In our country, regrettably, teaching and learning for the examination have been our forte actually, but the new demands of society and the future of work require critical and independent thinking. Learning through doing, asking questions from multiple disciplinary perspectives on the same issue, using evidence for building arguments and reflecting and articulation. Higher education should not either be a mere servant of the government policy or a passive respondent to public mood. Higher education, higher learning is all about how to think rather than what to think. Teaching has to be reinvented. What is the passage saying? Passage says that our education system, regrettably, the author is sad about it, that teaching and learning for examination has been our forte. And our focus, our education system absolutely focuses on teaching and learning. Teach, learn, write the examination, right? But the demands of society are much more wider, much more critical and much more severe. So that is why we need to develop a multidisciplinary approach of looking at the same issue from multiple angles. Now, how do we do that? We do that by using evidence for building arguments and reflecting and articulation. Any problem, imagine this is the problem is about development. You have to look at development or mining. You have to look at mining from geographical point of view, historical point of view, social point of view, and then legal point of view as well, multiple point of views. That is what the new society, new demands of the society are. And higher learning is all about how to think rather than what to think. So basically, you're not parroting what the government says. Higher education should not either be a mere servant of the government policy, not repeating what the government says, not parroting what the government says, or passive respondent to public mood, or not just going with public because public is imagine angry or happy, so you repeat whatever the public said. No, it needs you to be able to think rather than how to think rather than what to think. So you should know how to think instead of you being told what to think, right? Like thinking in the way of government or public, that is not how you need to do, but instead you need to think independently. Teaching has to be, that's why, reinvented. So based on this, let's have look at the passage. Which of the following best reflects the central idea conveyed by the passage? See, the central idea or the main idea is very simple in this passage. I have not looked at the options yet, but it's quite clear that the passage says that teaching needs to be reinvented because the way we operate right now is very much examination focused. So what do we need to do? We need to develop critical thinking in a way that we are able to look at things objectively instead of repeating whatever has been told to us, right? That is what critical thinking is. So India does not have enough resources for promoting quality education in the passage never goes into the realm of resources. So A can be eliminated. Institutions of higher learning in the country should not be under the control of the government. Again, this is not what the passage is talking about. Classroom approach to higher education should be done away with. Classroom approach, is it, or examination based approach is? Okay, let's have a look at option D. Classroom needs to be reimagined. Okay. And teaching needs to be reinvented. Absolutely right. This is our answer. Classroom approach should not be done away with. The author says that teaching and learning for the perspective of examination in the first paragraph itself. That teaching and learning for the examination is our forte, but this should be done away with, not the classroom. You can learn how to be critically aware in the classroom itself, not an issue with that. And that is why classroom needs to be reimagined in a different way and teaching needs to be reinvented. Therefore, D is the right answer. With reference to the passage, following assumptions, certain assumptions have been made. Let's identify whether they are valid or not. Higher education is a constantly evolving subject that needs to align towards new development in all spheres of society. Absolutely right. This is absolutely right assumption. Why? Because this says new demands of society needs independent thinking, learning, and from multidisciplinary perspective on the same issue. So that is why this one is fair enough. This one is valid assumption. Now, in our country, sufficient funds are not allocated for promoting higher education. We have never delved into this part about funds and allocating it by the government, etc., etc. So, two can be eliminated. Only one is fair assumption. So, option A is your right answer. Let's have a look at this passage. In our country, handlooms are equated with a culture that ensures a continuity of tradition. This idea has become part of the public policy framing and provides a legitimate basis for the state to support the sector. The sector of handloom is part of our public policy as well as state supports it. Why? Because they are equated with a culture that ensures a continuity of tradition. Handloom, so we can write it down as handloom HL equals to tradition. Tradition or identity of Indian culture, handloom is associated with that. And that is why handloom is important part of the public policy framing and is a legitimate business for the state to support the sector. Now, but the notion of tradition as a single linear entity is being strongly contested today. The narratives dominant in defining culture tradition in a particular way are seen to have emerged as the identities and histories of large section. The discounted and at times forcibly stifled identities are fighting for their rightful place in history. Against this backdrop, when we promote handloom as a traditional industry, it is not surprising that large section of our population choose to ignore it. So, what does it say? The narrative dominant in defining culture tradition. There are certain narratives dominant in defining culture, right? Some people saying that this is part of our culture, this is part of a tradition, others are not. That kind of narrative, it seen to have emerged as identities and histories of large section. So, it is the culture, the narrative around the culture and tradition, it has emerged as identity of the large sections of society, but the, where is that? The stifled identities, the smaller groups, the minority groups, okay, linguistic or cultural minorities or ethnic minorities, religious minorities, they are fighting for their rightful place in history. This larger sections way of determining identity and tradition does not include the point of view of these stifled groups. And that is why against this backdrop, when we promote handloom as a traditional industry, it is not surprising that large section of population choose to ignore it. Why? Because large section of population does not consider it as a part of the tradition, because their tradition is different, while on the other hand, the stifled and minority groups that actually were involved with handloom production, it is part of their own identity. So, moving ahead for the question, let's have a look at the question. Which of one of the following statements best reflect the most logical and rational message conveyed by the author of the passage? Okay, the most logical and rational message clearly means the main idea. So, what is the main idea of the passage? The main idea of the passage says, since the dominant narrative ignores traditional handlooms because it is not seen as part of the tradition or culture, okay, and the stifled narrative or stifled groups are those which actually see it as part of their tradition, and that is the reason why preserving handlooms as part of tradition is not that popular, okay. So, what is the main idea of the passage? We need to free the handloom industry from the limited narrative linked to preserving cultural heritage. Should we remove it from that? Yes, that is the main idea. Basically, the author is saying, why the author is saying that we should remove it from the limited narrative, because it itself answers, it answers itself that it is a limited narrative, because it does not belong to the major group, majority of the group, the large section of the population, and that is why they have a disinterest. So if you want to protect handlooms, need to move away from projecting it as a part of tradition, and this is what that option is saying. So let's park option A, let's have a look at option B. Continued state support to the handloom industry ensures the preservation of some of our glorious art forms and old traditions. Does the passage talk about that? See, the whole passage was about the tussle between the dominant group versus the not so dominant group, the minority, smaller groups, right? The major sections, the dominant sections that form or define what the tradition and culture are, they don't consider handloom as part of it, and that is why this option is wrong option, because this is not what the main focus of the paragraph is. This is not the logical or rational message. This is just something else altogether. This is not part of the whole schemata. So B can be eliminated. C, household units of the handloom sector should be modernized and made an economically viable organized industry. Household units, we have never talked about household units. We don't even have any idea about it. So C can be eliminated. D, handloom products need to be converted to machine made designer products so as to make them more popular. This absolutely goes against the idea of the passage, saying move handlooms to machine made designer product. If you are taking away handlooms towards machine made designer product, what is it even worth it? D can also be worth it. D can also be eliminated, because the whole point of preserving handloom is that it is part of our culture and tradition, although not of the dominant group. So if you make it machine made designer product, it's useless, and that is why D can also be eliminated. We are left with option A. Option A is the right answer. With reference to the passage, the following assumptions have been made. Again, two assumptions have been made. We have to identify which one are valid. There is no need for the state to be involved in any manner in the handloom sector. Does the passage say that? Absolutely not. Clear cut right away, eliminate these options. No need for state to be involved. State needs to be involved, but it needs to change its approach from projecting it as something which is associated with tradition. Approach needs to differ. Now come up with some new idea, is what the passage is saying. Handloom products are no longer appealing and attractive. Again, eliminated. No longer appealing and attractive. No, this is not what the passage says. They are appealing and attractive or not. We cannot comment upon that, because this is out of scope of the passage. The passage clearly says that the way to preserve it, the way that we are moving ahead, preserving it by linking it with tradition, is not the right way. That's it. It does not say that these products are not attractive or something else altogether. So both can be eliminated. Both have been eliminated. Which one of the following are valid? Neither. Neither one nor two. So that is option D is the answer to your question. Let's have a look at this passage. Each state in India faces a distinctive set of challenges regarding the impact of warming, but also offer its own set of opportunities for reducing emissions depending on its natural resources. So each state in India faces a distinctive set of challenges. Different states in India have different set of challenges. Absolutely right. Regarding what? The impact of warming. The warming here mentioned here is referring to global warming, but also offers its own set of opportunities for reducing emission depending on its natural resources. So we can take the example, right? The best part about understanding or solving, or best approach to solving CSAT questions, the reading comprehension question, is while you're reading, you're thinking at the same time. So as soon as I read this, the first thought that came up in my head is, for example, the Himalayan states of Kashmir, or Jammu and Kashmir, or Uttarakhand, or Himachal Pradesh, right? They have different sets of problem. They have the melting of ice caps, avalanches, and general increase in the temperature, which leads to loss of ice caps as well, loss of ice cover as well. That is the problem that they are going to face. which will lead to soil erosion eventually over a period of time. That is the problem that the Himalayan states might face. The central Indian states or the riverine plains states, they are going to have the problem of constant flooding. At the same time, the increase in the ocean surface temperature and the ocean surface level is also going to cause flooding in the coastal region, right? So, it causes, it provides, it offers its own set of opportunities, not opportunities, own set of challenges, distinctive set of challenges. Different states have got their own type of challenges. Now, it also offers its own set of opportunities to deal with the problem, to reduce emission. Every single state has its own opportunity to reduce the emission depending on its natural resources. Whatever way they can reduce the emission, different states can do it in a different way. For example, coastal states need to take action to protect their shores from sea level rise. Districts that are drier need to prepare for variable monsoon precipitation. Himalayan regions have their own unique challenges, and selected parts of peninsular India and offshore areas offer great opportunities for harnessing wind power. To be honest, I did not read this passage before this, so the thought that came up in my head was automatically inclined towards Himalayas and plains and your coastal areas. The passage itself talk about those, right? So it is a confirmation, it is a proof for me that I was thinking in the right direction. So the passage has provided, the paragraph has provided us with the example that coastal states, they need to protect their shores, and districts, the dry districts, the interior districts need to prepare for variable monsoon precipitation. Himalayan regions have their own unique challenges, and selected parts of peninsular India and offshore areas offer great opportunities for harnessing wind power. Okay, what is the way they can reduce emission? Some areas can have opportunities for reducing wind power. These various aspects need to be considered for developing clear and sustainable goals for the future. Now, if you think in this particular direction, you will have a clear goal, you will have a clear idea how to develop sustainably, is what the author is trying to say. So, the whole point of the paragraph is there are issues, different issues for different states, the first thing, but the way to deal with them is also going to be different, right? The way to reduce emission is also going to be different for different states, and then provides you with the example, and then says in the conclusion says these various aspects need to be considered for developing. So, you have to take care of both the point 1 and point 2 for developing in a clear, sustainable way, is what the paragraph is saying. Different states, different problem with respect to global warming, the first point. The second point is different opportunities to reduce emission as well. The third thing is keeping this at the back of your mind, we can have a clear plan for sustainable development. Simple as that. Very simple paragraph. Let's have a look at the questions now. Which one of the following statement best reflects the most logical, rational and pragmatic message conveyed by the author of the passage? Main idea question, most logical, pragmatic, etc., etc. Most logical, this means there could be some option which are logical, but you have to pick the best one out of them. So again, it's a main idea question. I'll write it as main idea. Apologies for my handwriting. Mitigation and adaptation strategies to tackle the climate change is essentially the responsibility of each state. Okay, so it says to mitigate and adapt strategies to tackle climate change is the responsibility of each state. Does the paragraph talk about it in the sense of responsibility? It does not. It talks about in the sense of opportunities, that this is a way to provide us with a clear picture that how do we want to develop our country in a sustainable way. But does it say that different states have different problems, so deal with it on your own, it is your responsibility? It never says that, and that is why option A can be eliminated. India is too diverse to implement any effective strategy program to tackle the climate change. Now it says implement any effective strategy. So India cannot implement any effective strategy. That means zero strategies, no strategy is going to work. Does the passage say that? Absolutely not. The passage says that we need to implement many effective strategies, not any, right? Any effective strategy cannot implement. Too diverse to implement any effective strategy means zero, nothing is going to work. But the author says that different states have different demands, different needs, different challenges, and based on that, the strategy might differ. So there needs to be many effective strategies. This itself is incorrect. This part of the paragraph is incorrect, and that is why we can eliminate option B right away. Okay. See, it is basically the responsibility of the union government to implement the climate. Again, same thing. States should deal with it. Union government should deal with it. On the same line, but just transferring the burden from state to union government. The passage never says that. Passage says that different states have different problem. This will give us a clear picture how to deal with it, right? So C is also eliminated. Most certainly D is the right answer. Let's have a look at it. India needs to formulate effective climate change mitigation. Yes, it needs to do that. The last line, the conclusion of the paragraph, if we go back to the paragraph, various aspects need to be considered for developing clear and sustainable goals for the future. An effective climate change solution. Now, and adaptation strategies at the state region level. Yes, we need to do this because each state, each region comes with its own set of challenges. So yes, option D is absolutely the right answer. With reference to the passage, the following assumptions have been made. Again, an assumption question, which is critical reasoning question. Let's have a look at this. Author made some assumption. Assumption is basically author assumed that you will already know this thing, right? So he did not, or she did not write it specifically, assuming that you will already know. You will be able to draw the connection, draw the dots, connect the dots, right? So let's have a look at the question now. Green energy production can be linked to integrated with the climate change mitigation and adaptation strategies. Green energy production can be linked to integrated with the climate change mitigation and adaptation strategy. Yes, this has been implied. Where exactly? If you go back to the paragraph, it talks about selected parts of peninsular India and offshore areas offer great opportunities for harnessing wind power. So, green initiative, it offers its own set of opportunities, and for example, the author has provided with one of the initiative, one of the thing that you can do to tackle the climate change or the global warming, right? So, green energy production can be linked to integrated with the climate change mitigation and adaptation strategy. Absolutely, yes. We have been provided the example of wind energy for that. So, yes, this has been made, assumption has been made here. Effects of climate change are much more severe in coastal and mountainous region. Now, did the author say that one has more severe, other has more, less severe? Go back to the paragraph. Let's go back to the paragraph. Nowhere does the author says that, right? They all have their own distinctive set of challenges. One area will have one, the other area will have other. But does it anywhere says that one is going to be more severe than the other? Absolutely not. And since this is not true, this assumption has not been made at all in the passage. So we can eliminate 2. Which of the following, which of the above assumptions are valid? How many of them are valid? Let's have only one. So option A is the right answer. Now, if there is inequality in the pattern of population growth, there is greater inequality in food production and utilization. A fairly straightforward point, that if there is inequality in population growth, one section is growing in a different way, other section is growing in a different way, then there is going to be inequality in food production and utilization as well. For example, the developed countries of West, they are growing in a different way, right? Their population is not growing that much. Their population is growing more because of the migration. And that's why their food production and utilization are a near optimum level. On the other hand, developing countries and poorer countries, they have issues. They have issues with the same. So, as societies become wealthier, their consumption of animal products increases. This means that a greater proportion of such basic foodstuff as grain and legumes that could feed humans directly is instead being converted into feed for poultry and large farm animals. Yet this conversion of plant-based food into animal food for humans is far from efficient. Only 16% of the calories fed to chickens are recovered by us when we eat them. This conversion rate goes down to 5 to 7% in larger animals that are fed grains to add fat and some protein before slaughter. So basically this is what it is saying. This means that a greater proportion of such basic foodstuff as grains and legumes that could be fed human, that could feed human directly, is instead being converted. So what is happening? The more people are, as societies become wealthier, consumption of animal products increases. The poorer the society is, the consumption of animal products is lesser, right? So as the society becomes wealthier, you are consuming more animal products. So instead of feeding the legumes or grains to human being, now you're giving it to the animals that need to be slaughtered, right? And that is not an efficient way, because 16% of what you feed to chicken is only 16% is recovered. At the same time, 5 to 7% of large animals are recovered. So it's about transfer of calorific transfer from one animal to another. The bigger the animal is, the more you feed it, the lesser you get in return, right? The same amount of feed that you're feeding animal, you could have given it to human being, and a lot more people would have been calorifically satisfied. Okay, a fairly simple paragraph based on environment and ecologic topic. So moving ahead, which one of the following statement best reflects the crux of the passage? Crux of the passage, the main idea of the passage. There is an urgent need for public policy to promote the consumption of cereal based foods in wealthier society. Does the paragraph say that there is an urgent need? No, it just provides you with a point of view that this is happening. As societies transform, they shift towards non-veg, or they shift toward meat, and meat is not really efficient way of consuming food, is what the passage is trying to say. Does it say that urgent need for public policy to promote? Not at all. So A can be eliminated. Animal based food is far less efficient than plant based food in terms of production and utilization. Absolutely yes, far less efficient, because the amount that you're feeding to an animal, you only get 16% in chicken or 5 to 7% in larger animals. So yes, we can park this. Plant based protein should replace the animal based protein in our, no, not at all. We never went into territory of protein. Inequality in food production and consumption is inevitable in any fast. Is it inevitable? We never went into the territory of inevitable. It just says that there is a gradual transformation. Is that transformation of eating more meat inevitable? Not at all. That is not what the passage says. So D can also be eliminated. We are left with B. B is definitely our right answer. With reference to the passage, following assumptions have been made. Two assumptions have been made. We have to identify which one of them are valid. The food manufacturing and processing industries in every country should align with their objective and process in accordance with the changing needs of the society. Not really a fair assumption, I'll say. Why? Because we have zero information about the food manufacturing and processing industry given in the paragraph. You cannot assume anything. See, the assumption should always point towards the conclusion. That is only a fair assumption. If you are making random assumption, this is a random assumption. This is not pointing towards a conclusion, and that is why option 1 can be eliminated. Why this is random? Because food manufacturing processing industry, nor is it mentioned, neither is it mentioned in the passage, nor is it implied anywhere. If that is the case, then how could this be the right answer? So right assumption. So this is not the right assumption. Let's have a look at the second one. Wealthier societies tend to incur great loss of calories of food materials due to indirect utilization of their agricultural produce. Yes, wealthier societies incur great loss of calories of food material, as shown through example of chicken and larger animals, due to indirect utilization of their agricultural produce. Basically, you're feeding grains or feeding maize to chicken, and the amount of calories you're feeding, you only get 16% of that in return. So yes, absolutely right. So only one is right. Option 2 statement, assumption 2 is right. So option B is the right answer. Over the next 30 years, many countries are promising to move to net zero carbon, implying that household emissions will have to be cut to close to nothing. A leading climate scientist reckons that at best half the reduction might be achieved through demand side measures such as behavioral change by individuals and households. Even that would require companies and governments to produce more incentives to change through supply side investment to make low carbon options cheaper and more widely available. So over the next 30 years, we are moving towards net zero. What does that net zero imply? It implies that household emission must be cut to zero. That is how it will be possible to achieve. But then a leading climate scientist has said that only half of it will we be able to achieve by behavioral changes by individual and household. Okay. Now, even that would require companies and governments to provide more incentive. Even to achieve half of our targets, we need to provide more incentives from companies and the government through supply side investment to make low carbon options cheaper and more widely available. So what it is saying is individual household need to basically bring down their consumption to zero, net zero carbon, their emissions to be zero. It should be close to nothing. So whatever you are producing, you are consuming the same amount of carbon as well. That is net zero. It should be close to net zero for individual household. But a leading climate scientist says that is very difficult to achieve. We can only be able to achieve half of that. And why? Even that half that we will be able to achieve would only be possible through government and companies pushing for more incentives. For example, government making solar energy or making wind energy or renewable energies cheaper, or solar energy more accessible to each and every single household. That could be one way to make low carbon options cheaper and more widely available. Okay. Now, which one of the following statement best reflects the central idea conveyed by the passage? Moving to net zero carbon is possible only by the reduction in household. Only by the reduction? No. It says that to achieve this, we need net reduction in the household. But does it say it is the only way? No, not at all. If you look at the passage, it says, implying that household will have to be cut to close to nothing. But is it the only way? No, this is not what the passage says, and that is why option A can be eliminated. Low carbon behavior in people can be brought about by incentivizing them. Yes, we need to incentivize them. Government, not we, like government and the companies need to incentivize them. So absolutely right. Cheaper goods and services can be made available to people by using low carbon. Cheaper goods and services, out of the scope of the passage, C can be eliminated. Not discussed about, we are not discussing about goods and services. This is a very broad, goods and services could be anything. Manufacturing industries that use low carbon technologies should be provided with the subsidies. Again, manufacturing industries should be provided with subsidies. This is out of the scope of the passage, because in the passage we have not discussed what should be done for the manufacturing industries. We have discussed how the households could be incentivized to bring down their consumption by the government and the companies, right? So this is out of the scope of the passage. Left with B. B is the right answer. With reference to the passage, the following assumptions have been made. Two assumptions, which one of them are valid? Again, the same question. Supply side investment in companies can result in low carbon behavior in people. Yes, supply side investment. When companies are supplying and they are investing in more side, making things cheaper, that could lead to low carbon behavior in people. Absolutely a possible scenario, a possible assumption. So yes, this could be parked. Option 2. Assumption 2, people are not capable of adapting low carbon behavior without involvement of government and companies. Does the passage say that? Let's go back to the passage. It says that even that would require companies and government to provide more incentive to change the supply side investment to make low carbon options cheaper and more viable. But does it say that people are not capable of adapting low carbon behavior without incentives? No. And that is why, without involvement of government and companies, no, and that is why option 2, assumption 2 is not right, because this is out of the scope of the passage. We have not discussed that what if scenario, that what if the companies and government don't give the required incentives, right, making things cheaper. We have not discussed that scenario. We have said that if you want to achieve this, the incentives must be provided. What if they are not provided? Scenario is not even there in the paragraph. So this assumption is completely out of the scope. So you're left with which of the following assumptions are valid? Only one makes sense. So option A is the right answer. In only 50 years, the world's consumption of raw materials has nearly quadrupled. to more than 100 billion tons. Okay, 100 billion or tons of raw material is being consumed in last 50 years has been consumed. Less than 9% of this is reused. 9%, 100 billions, less than 9%. So basically 9 billion tons is reused. Batteries of old vehicles contain materials such as lithium, cobalt, manganese, nickel that are pricey and can be hard to obtain. Supply chains are long and complicated. Buyers' risks are being aggravated by their suppliers' poor environmental and labor standards. Reusing materials makes sense. Once batteries reach the end of their lives, they should go back to a factory where their ingredients can be recovered and put into new batteries. So, fair enough. This says that reuse. There are three fundamental rules, right? Recycle, reuse, and something else. I don't remember, I don't recall. But yeah, reduce, recycle, reduce, reuse. This is talking about that. One of the component, that is reuse. In only 50 years, 100 billion tons have been raw material has been used, out of which only 9% has been reused. So the whole point is reuse more. Simple. By giving the example of batteries. If you have batteries, send it to some factory where all of these individual elements, individual components made up of manganese, cobalt, nickel, lithium, they can be separated and then they can be reused again. Simple. So, which one of the following statement best reflects the most logical, rational and pragmatic message conveyed by the paragraph? Again, the main idea, most logical, pragmatic message. Green economy is not possible without reusing critical minerals. Is it not possible? We never went into this territory. And whenever you come across these terms like only this will happen, not possible at all, this, that, remove it. This is clearly out of the scope of the passage. Passage never really said that it is not possible. It says that it is important to reduce because we are using too much, but we are not reusing a lot, right? So it is very important to reuse more and more. Third one, every sector of economy should adapt the reuse of material resources immediately. Every sector of economy. We did not go into every sector of economy. Not the main idea. Main idea should be from the passage. This is not a random assumption that you are making. So B can be eliminated. Circular economy can be beneficial for sustainable growth. Circular use of material resources is the only option for some industries for their survival. Circular economy is basically you use it, you extract, use it, then extract it again, then use it. So basically we are making a circle. I have not made the right circle, like basically extracting, making component, sending it for recycle, re-extracting it again and using it again and again. So there is this whole circular cycle. Use it, discard it, then you extract again, then you use it again, like that. So is that economy beneficial for sustainable growth? Yes, this is what the whole point of the passage is. Reuse more and more. Whatever you have used, reuse it again. Circular use of material resources is the only option. Only option. Does the passage go into the territory? Not at all. D can be eliminated. Left with C. C is the right answer. With reference to the passage, the following assumptions have been made. We have made certain assumptions. Let's have a look at them and then identify which one of them are valid. Automobile factories are example of circular economy. Automobile factories are example of circular economies. Are they? Yes. Because you buy a car, you send it to scrape, every single part is removed from it and those parts are used again. So yes, example of circular economy. Economic growth is compatible with circular use of mineral resources. It is compatible, yes. So if you are using mineral resources again and again, economic growth will also be there, right? Basically, you are not sitting idle, you are not letting things go to waste. You are creating new means of production and you are creating new means of employment as well. So yes, economic growth is compatible. So we have both 1 and 2 as the right assumptions. So which option is going to be right? C, both 1 and 2. The history of renewable energy suggests that there is a steep learning curve, meaning that as more is produced, costs fall rapidly because of economies of scale and learning by doing. So steep learning curve means as more is produced, as you produce more, costs fall rapidly. Why? Because of economies of scale and learning by doing. Economies of scale means if you produce things in large amount, the cost automatically falls. That is economy of scale. So, author has repeated the same point twice. Author is saying that renewable energy, its history suggests that there is a steep learning curve. As more is produced, cost falls automatically because of economies of scale and learning by doing. The firm's green innovation is path dependent. Now, there are firms, there are companies, there are industries, their green innovations are path dependent. The more a firm does, the more it is likely to do in the future. Now, what is the path? That more initiative, more efforts that they make now, the more they will be doing in the future as well. So, the strongest evidence for this is in the collapse of the price of solar energy. Now, where is the proof for that? The strongest evidence is that collapse in the price of solar energy, which became about 90% cheaper during the 2010s, repeatedly beating forecast. Moving early and gradually gives economies more time to adjust, allowing them to reap the benefits of path-dependent green investment. So, if you move early, the early mover advantage, and gradually gives economies more time to adjust. If you move early, it gives you more time to adjust, allowing them to reap the benefit of path dependent. What is that path dependent? That the more you do now, the more you will be benefiting in the future as well, more you will be doing in the future as well, without much disruption. So, basically, if you change the habit now, for example, in your UPSC preparation, if you think that I'll prepare for CSAT in the final 2 weeks, maybe you won't be able to, maybe you will be able to, right? At the same time, if you don't do that, if you prepare for 3 months in advance, by the time CSAT approaches, you will be quite comfortable to deal with it, right? The same logic applies here. That is the path dependent approach. A late, more chaotic transition is costlier. More delays there, the later it gets, the more chaos is going to be there, and that might turn out to be costlier. So, this is what the paragraph is saying. So, if we want to summarize it in short, we can say that the history of renewable energy, basically from the renewable energies example, we can understand that it is path dependent, and because of the economies of scale, the prices usually go down, right? And how is it path dependent? Because the more efforts you make today, the more chances are that you will be doing it in the future as well. And when prices go down in the future, you will be benefiting from it. And then gives the example of the early 2010s one, the solar energy in early 2010 when there was 90% reduction in the price. Clear? Now, let's jump to the question, which one of the following best reflects the central idea? Central idea is again main idea type question, is asking what is the central idea of the passage. You have to go through the options and then identify the right answer. Economies of scale is essential for transition to green growth. It is, yes, if you go back to the paragraph, cost falls rapidly because of economies of scale and learning by doing. Yes, but it is one aspect. The whole paragraph never talks about economies of scale, right? This is one aspect. Then you need to do this, but it never says that economies of scale is the most important thing, right? It says that by economies of scale, the cost will fall. So, it is path dependent. The more efforts you make today, the easier the transition will be in the future. As simple as that. So, it is one part of the main idea, but not complete main idea, not complete central idea to be precise. And that is why I am going to park this option. I am not eliminating it right away, not eliminating it because it is not incorrect, but it is not complete. It is not really a good answer. Now, modern technological progress is intensely linked to path dependent innovations. Modern technological progress, right? For example, solar energy, right, is intensely linked to path dependent innovation. Now, the issue with this option is that the passage just talks about the history of renewable energy. It never talks about modern technological innovations, right? It says that history of renewable energy suggests that there is a steep learning curve. The whole point of view of the passage is towards renewable energy. It's not talking about other innovations in technology, okay? But this option is very broad because of that. Modern technological progress. We are not really talking about it, okay? This could be true in general sense, but in the context of the passage, it doesn't make much sense because it is not mentioned here. We are just focused on renewable energies, not completely modern technological progress. So we can eliminate B as well. C, countries with large economies are in a better position to adopt green technologies. Again, very random. Countries with larger economies. Has it been mentioned? Has it been implied? Not at all. It says that there is an early mover advantage, and with the gradual passage of time, it becomes cheaper. So there is an early mover advantage. So that if you transition earlier, the later transition won't be that chaotic. So it's good to transition earlier instead of waiting for time and doing it in a rush later, right? Countries with larger economies are in a better position. Not really mentioned, not really part of the main idea, not really part of the passage. So we can eliminate this option. Timing plays a crucial role in the case of green technology development. Brilliant. Yeah. Timing does play. Why? Because the passage does talk about it, right? That there is early mover advantage, whereas that moving early and gradually gives economies more time to adjust, allowing them to reap the benefits of path dependent green investment without much disruption. Also says a late, more chaotic transition is costlier. As I said multiple times before this as well, that the quicker the transition is, the better it will be for a longer period of time. If you do it late, that is going to create a lot of chaos and disruption, and it might turn out to be costlier. So this is what the passage is all talking about. See, even the first part, it says that costs fall rapidly, right? So economies of scale and learning by doing. Because of economies of scale, eventually the cost falls, right? So you transition from the beginning itself, so that the later transition, the later phase will be much more easier to deal with. If you do it at the late stage, it might turns out to be very chaotic and costly. So timing plays a crucial role. Does it play a crucial role according to the passage? Absolutely yes. In case of green technology development. Now again, pay attention. It talks about just green technology, not modern technological process. It's not that random, not vague, right? It is pinpointing towards green technology development. And that is why option D can also be parked. Now you have two options that are right according to the passage. Which one makes most sense? Obviously option D, and that is why option D is the right answer. Answer to question is option D. Timing plays a crucial role in the case of green technology development. Let's have a look at this question. With reference to the above passage, the following assumptions have been made. Again, assumptions, unset premise. You have to identify that the point that the author has made but did not said it clearly. Okay, author implied it. That means author assumed that you will already know that when he is making his arguments, right? So out of the given 2 points, which of the following two statements or sentences are the assumptions made by the author? So let's have a look at it. Path dependent green investment will eventually most likely benefit growth as well as public finances in a country like India. Now, what does the author say? Path dependent green investment will eventually most likely benefit growth. Let's break it down. Is it implied in the paragraph? Yes, it is. Why? Because a late, more chaotic transition is costlier. If it is path dependent and then it gives more economies more time to adjust, allowing them to reap the benefit of path dependent green investment without much disruption. That clearly means the first part of the assumption or the statement is in line, as well as public finances in a country like India. Yes, it talks about economies. We can assume the example of India. Nothing wrong with that. So yes, has this been an assumption made by the author? Absolutely right. So I'll take it. Now, if other green technologies follow the same pattern as that of solar energy, there will be most likely be an easy green transition. Now, this says if other green technologies follow the same pattern as that of solar energy, there are other green technologies as well if they follow the same pattern as that of solar energy. What was the solar energy pattern? The path dependent pattern, right? The path dependent investment, that you invest earlier and you reap the benefit over the due course period of time, and the economies of scale and innovation leads to decrease in the price, right? So if other green technologies follow the same pattern as that of solar energy, there will most likely be an easy green transition. Is it right according to the passage? If we go back to the passage, the author says that the more a firm does, the more it is likely to do in the future. That is a path dependent approach. And the strongest evidence for this is in the collapse in the price of solar energy, which became about 90% cheaper during the 2010s, beating the forecast. Okay. So, moving early and gradually gives economies more time to adjust, allowing them to reap the benefit of path-dependent green investment. Now, when it is talking about green investment, path-dependent green investment, it is not limiting itself to just solar energy. It is talking about the overall. When it is talking about the overall green investment, not just solar energy, that makes the option 2 a right option. Right? Assumption. If other green technologies follow the same pattern as that of solar energy, there will most likely be an easy green transition. Yes, has this assumption been made? Absolutely yes. Because author gave you an example of solar energy to drive the point that over due course of time, the prices fall because of economies of scale. And the second thing is that if you make quicker transition, then over the period of time, the transition will be smooth. But at the same time, if you wait for a longer period of time, you will struggle. And therefore, the author gave the example of solar energy to prove that. So, if other green technology follow the same pattern as that of solar energy, there will most likely be an easy green transition. Is that an assumption that the author has made? Absolutely yes. So, there are both the statements are the assumption that the author has made. So, we can, which of the following assumptions are valid? Both 1 and 2 are valid. So, we will go with option C. Option C is the right answer. If the social inequality is the most acutely felt social problem in India, insecurity more than poverty is the most acutely felt economic problem. Besides, those below the official poverty line, even those just over the poverty line, are subject to multiple economic insecurities of various kinds due to wealth and or health risk, market fluctuations, job-related uncertainties. Many government policies are actually intended towards mitigating these insecurities. So, this is saying if social inequality, if social inequality is the most acutely felt social problem in India, social inequality, the inequality between social groups, if or individuals in society, if that is the most acutely felt social problem in India, then poverty, insecurity, actually not poverty, insecurity, the economic insecurity, the economic insecurity more than poverty is the most acutely felt economic problem. The insecurity is the most acutely felt economic problem. So, social inequality is the most acutely felt social problem. Insecurity is the most acutely felt economic problems. Then author goes on to provide, the passage goes on to provide multiple reasons for that. What are these kind of economic insecurities and what are they due to? Various kind due to wealth, health risk, market fluctuations, etc., etc. So, government policies are actually intended towards mitigating these insecurities. The insecurities caused due to these multiple reasons. This is what the paragraph says. Let's have a look at the question. Which one of the following statements best reflects the critical message conveyed by the passage? Again, critical message conveyed by the passage clearly is asking for the main idea. India's political executive should be aware that poverty and social inequality and the consequent sense of insecurity is the main social problem. No, it is not the main social problem, but the paragraph is not talking about the social inequality. We are not concerned with the social inequality. We are concerned with the insecurity, economic insecurity. So, this can be eliminated. Absolutely. Why? Because this is not talking about the message of the passage. This is talking about something else altogether. In India, poverty is the primary reason for social inequality and insecurity. No, the passage never says that. Passage says insecurity more than poverty is the Most severe reason. It does not say that poverty is the reason for insecurity or inequality. So this also can be eliminated. See, poverty and social inequality are so intricately linked that they pose unmanageable crisis for India. Again, this does not talk about the insecurity. This talks about poverty and social inequality. The focus of the passage is insecurity, the economic insecurity. So eliminated, we are left with D. D should certainly be the answer, but let's have a look at it. Insecurity more than poverty is the main economic issue that the government policies must address. Absolutely right. This one focuses on insecurity, and that is why option D is the right answer. With reference to the passage, the following assumptions have been made. There are certain assumptions that have been made with reference to the passage. We have to identify if these assumptions are valid or not. Now, first assumption, people above the poverty line are also prone to suffer from anxiety about economic insecurity. Absolutely yes. If you go back to the passage, this says even those just over the poverty line are subject to multiple economic insecurities. So yes, this is clearly given. So this is right, valid. Eradication of poverty can result in peace and social equality in the country. Nowhere does the passage talk about peace. Not at all. Out of the scope of the passage. That is why the second assumption is wrong. So which of the following assumptions are valid? Only one. Therefore, A is the right answer. Trust stands commonly defined as being vulnerable to others. Entrepreneurship implies trust in others and willingness to expose oneself to betrayal. Trust in expert system is essence of globalizing behavior. Trust itself emerges as a super commodity in the social market and defines the characteristics of goods and services in global market. Trusting conduct also means holding others in good esteem and an optimism that they are or will be competent in certain respects. So, trust is very important, not just for an individual, but for an entrepreneur, for business, not just locally, but even worldwide. So, it is something which is seen in very good esteem, which is seen in very good light. Okay, if we move ahead, question, which one of the following statement best reflects the crux of the passage? Again, main idea. Trustworthiness cannot be expected in entrepreneurship. Absolutely wrong. The passage itself says that entrepreneurship implies trust. So that can be expected in entrepreneurship. Trustworthy people are the most vulnerable people. We have not ventured into that territory yet. Are they vulnerable? They are willing, commonly defined as being vulnerable to others. But are they the most vulnerable people? Most vulnerable people is an extreme overstatement, and that is why option B can be eliminated. See, no economic activity is possible without being exposed to betrayal. Absolutely right. But no economic activity is possible without being exposed to betrayal. Absolutely not right. Economic activity is possible without being exposed to betrayal. Yes. And no economic. This is an extreme statement, just like the most vulnerable thing. So it can be eliminated. Trust is important, though it entails risk. Yes. Absolutely important. And that is why option D is the right answer. A network of voluntary associations stand as buffer between relatively powerless individual and potential powerful state. This says that there are voluntary association. We can think of them as labor unions, or we can think of them as agricultural farmers unions, right? They are voluntary, or even NGO as well, right? Voluntary association. People come and volunteer for it. They come together and form an association. They stand as a buffer between relatively powerless individual and potential powerful state. These association protects the individual from the wrath of the state, because individual alone can't do a lot of things. But when they come together and form these voluntary organization, then they can pitch or vouch for their own benefits and rights. So that you can see in the case of labor unions or your agriculture unions or farmers unions, or as I told you, NGOs and stuff, right? NGOs, NPOs, etc., etc. So which one of the following statement reflects the best explanation of the passage? Emphasize the inability of the state to enforce its will in practice against opposition of certain groups within it. Absolutely wrong. It is not the inability of the state. Inability of the state? No. It is inability of the individual to let their demands known to the state, right? And or protect themselves from the state. And this is not inability of state. That is not what the passage is referring to. So A can be eliminated. It is cooperative organization for the promotion of the well-being and development of the personality of its member. Development of the personality of its members, absolutely irrelevant stuff. We are not talking about development of the personality first. The second thing, cooperative organization for promotion of well-being. Is it just well-being? No, it is about fighting for your rights as well. So option B can also be eliminated. This is not the best explanation of the passage. Takes individual out of state of isolation and gives them a chance to participate in the common endeavor. Yes, individuals, they are relatively powerless because they are individuals. They cannot do anything by themselves. But when they come together, they can participate in the common endeavor, common goal, common pursuit. And how do they do that? With the help of voluntary association. So yes, this makes sense. Let's park it. Permit citizen to have a variety of loyalties. Nah, absolutely wrong. Permit, no one is talking about any kind of permission. So D can be eliminated. You're left with C. C is the right answer. A good statement, like any other sensible human being, statesman, like any other sensible human being, learns more from his opponents than from his fervent supporters. A good statesman, a person who is running a state, basically statesman is also another word for politician or someone who takes care of the state, learns more from his opponents than from his fervent supporter. A good statesman learns from his opponents more than his supporters. For his supporters will push him to disaster unless his opponents show him where the dangers are. So if he is wise, he'll often pray to be delivered from his friends because they'll ruin him. But though it hurts, he ought also to pray never to be left without opponents, for they keep him on the path of reason and good sense. So that is why what happens, the supporters might lead him to disaster unless opponents show him where the dangers are, right? So if he is wise, he'll often pray to be delivered from his friend because they will ruin him. But though it hurts, he ought also to pray never to be left without opponents. So having friends is okay, but it will ruin him. But also at the same time, he needs to pray, a good statement need to pray that there should be opponents as well. Because without opponents, because these opponents will keep him on the path of reason and good sense. So a statesman need opponents more than supporters, a good statement. The national unity of free people depends upon a sufficiently even balance of political power to make it impracticable for the administration to be arbitrary and for opposition to be revolutionary and irreconcilable. So what is this saying? National unity of people. When people are united under a single nation or a single identity, that depends upon sufficiently even balance of power. There needs to be a sufficient balance of power between the what is that? The political power, right? To make it impractical between the administration and the opposition. The administration and opposition, there should be a proper balance between both of them, so that opposition is not completely revolutionary and irreconcilable in nature. At the same time, administration is not using its power arbitrarily, right? So this is what this passage says. It says, to keep it short, statesman needs good opponents as well. A good statesman needs good opponents because these opponents will let him know or her know what are the problems, what are the dangers that lie ahead. Okay. And the other thing is there needs to be a fine balance between the administration and the opposition so that one does not dominate other, and that is how national unity is achieved. So moving ahead to the paragraph, to the question 1, which one of the following statement best reflects the critical message conveyed by the author? Again, main idea question, critical message by the author. Without opposition parties, the administration and the democracy gets to become more responsible. Does it become more responsible or becomes more irresponsible? The passage says it becomes, where is that? Administration becomes more arbitrary. Administration becomes, where is that? The opponents, they keep him on the path of reason and good sense. So administration needs opposition party, and without them administration does not become more responsible but becomes more arbitrary. So A can be eliminated. B, democracy needs to have revolutionaries in opposition to keep the government alert. Need to have revolutionaries? No. We don't want revolutionaries, we want a good opposition. So this is wrong. And we have to protect, we have to avoid the opposition from becoming revolutionary, is what this option has, this passage has said. So B is absolutely wrong. Rulers in a democracy need the support of opposition for their political no, need the support, absolutely wrong. They need existence of opposition but not support of opposition, because opposition will let them know where the danger lies, what mistakes they are making. So C is wrong. Left with D. D should certainly be our answer. In a democracy, the opposition is indispensable for the balance of political power and good governance. Absolutely right. Sits right with the passage. Our right answer. With reference to the passage, the following assumptions have been made. In a democracy, a strong opposition is required only if the head of the government is indifferent. Democracy, only a strong opposition is required only if the head of government is indifferent. Absolutely wrong. We always need for national unity, you always need a good opposition, is what the passage says. You need a good opposition so that the national unity of people, free people, can be achieved. And this says opposition is only required when the head of a government is indifferent. Absolutely wrong, right? Only required. Absolutely wrong. Option 2, assumption 2, the more the aggressive the opposition, the better is the government. Not really. It doesn't say that it should be more aggressive. Aggression has not been mentioned. We have to actually, instead it's the opposite. We have to avoid the opposition from becoming irreconcilable or revolutionary, right? So aggressive, they don't have to be. 1 and 2 are absolutely wrong assumptions. So which of the following assumptions are valid? D, option D, neither one, not 2. The single number for inflation is an aggregate across different commodities and services. The price rise, single number for inflation. Okay, what is inflation? How do we identify inflation? It is an aggregate across different commodities and services. The WPI and CPI, or deflator, right? Index. Okay. The price rise differs for different items of consumption. So the single number is arrived at by assigning weight to different commodities and services. For WPI, the weights in production are used. For CPI, the consumption basket is used. But people are not homogeneous. The consumption basket is vastly different for the poor, the middle class and the rich. Hence, CPI is different for each of these classes, and the composite index requires averaging the basket. So what is the passage talking about? It's saying that any kind of single number that you take up for inflation, it is made up of aggregate across different commodities and services. It's not just one commodity that you're talking about when you're talking about inflation. You're talking about aggregate of multiple commodities and services, right? And how is that measured? It's measured by assigning weight to different commodities. Imagine you have, most certainly you might know the concept of WPI and CPI, right? The same logic applies here. Different items have different weightage in the basket. And this thing also varies for poor people, because they will have different weightage to certain things as compared to middle class, as compared to rich people. So they all have a different weightage to everything in their basket, in things in their basket, and that thing is taken into consideration while creating a common CPI index, is what the paragraph is saying. Which one of the following statement best reflect the most logical, rational and crucial message conveyed by the passage? Which one of the following is basically the main idea of the passage? We must use WPI exclusively in measuring price rise and CPI should be done away with. The passage never says that WPI is more important and CPI should be done away with. We should remove CPI altogether. No. It says both have their own purpose. They both serve their own purpose. 2. The present calculation of inflation rate does not correctly measure price rise of individual item and commodity. Yes, it does not measure price rise of individual item and commodity, but instead what does it do? It takes basket and also if you look at the last line, a composite index requires averaging the basket. We take the composite index for different class groups, and we take the composite index for your different basket of products, different group of products. It's not about individual products, right? So, where is that? Yes. So, is this right according to the passage that they do not correct measurably price rise of individual item and commodity? Yes, because we are talking about a whole group of product, a whole basket of product, not individual product. So, B can be the right answer. Okay, C. Inflation data underpresents services in the... No, we have not discussed whether it underpresents or overpresents services. We have not ventured into that territory. So, C can be eliminated. Knowledge of inflation rate is not really of any use to anybody in the country. Absolutely extreme statement, can be eliminated right away. Why is it not used to anybody in the country? Absolutely wrong. Well, left with B. B is definitely a right answer.